When his grandfather, the legendary biker Earl Turner, passed away, Jack expected to inherit part of the family land. But the will changed everything. His cousin got it all: the house, the acres, the fortune. Jack? He got an old Harley and a forgotten patch of land off Route 66. Everyone saw it as rejection. But it was really the beginning of a journey that would reveal a secret buried for generations. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, family, and the hidden miracles along life's road. The wind crawled across the Arizona plain, carrying sand and silence in equal measure. The sky above Flagstaff was the pale copper of late afternoon, a color that made the old highway shimmer like it was made of memory instead of asphalt. Inside a squat concrete garage on the edge of town, Jack Turner wiped his hands on a rag blackened by years of oil and heat. Jack was 45, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose face had been carved by both wind and war. A faded scar ran along his left cheekbone, a reminder from his last deployment in Afghanistan when shrapnel from an IED had torn through the convoy. His beard was short, peppered with gray, and his eyes, a cold blue like the desert sky, had the distant look of a man who'd seen more than he ever wanted to. Yet there was gentleness in him, too, a steadiness that drew people to trust him, even when he hardly trusted himself. He glanced toward the open garage door, where his wife Marla leaned against the doorway with a mug of coffee. She was in her early 40s, slender but strong, with sunburned skin and light brown hair tied up under a red bandana. There was a quick wit behind her green eyes, the kind that came from surviving disappointment without losing humor. Marla had once been a road photographer, traveling with biker rallies across the Southwest, until she met Jack at a veterans charity ride 10 years ago. She had fallen for his quiet steadiness, for the way he could fix an engine, or a broken day, without many words. Together they had built this small repair shop, Turner's Garage, where the smell of oil mixed with the scent of sage carried in from the desert. At Marla's feet, Diesel, their German shepherd, lifted his head. He was an older dog, gray touching the muzzle, but his frame was still powerful. Diesel had served with Jack overseas, trained to detect explosives, and the bond between man and dog was something beyond words. Even now, years later, Diesel would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, low growls echoing through the dark, as if chasing ghosts only he could smell. Jack would sit beside him, hand resting on the dog's neck until both drifted back into uneasy sleep. That afternoon, an old envelope arrived by courier. Jack tore it open, the paper brittle and the ink faintly blurred by time. Inside was a letter from the law firm of Henderson and Cole, informing him that his grandfather Earl Turner had passed away, and the reading of the will would take place the next morning. Jack stared at the paper longer than he meant to. Earl Turner wasn't just family. He was legend. A lifelong biker who'd ridden Route 66 back when gas was 20 cents a gallon, and men believed the road could set them free. Jack remembered summer days at the old Turner farm, the smell of hay and gasoline, Earl teaching him how to balance a motorcycle before he could drive a car. It was Earl who taught him that every machine had a soul, and that you ride it, you don't own it. Marla set her mug down. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, but his voice came out rough. "Didn't think I'd hear from him again. We hadn't talked in years." She stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "Family's messy, babe. Sometimes silence just means someone ran out of words, not love." The next morning, the lawyer's office smelled of dust, coffee, and old leather. The reading of Earl Turner's will was brief and painfully formal. Seated in a semicircle were a few distant relatives, most of them younger, polite strangers in stiff suits. At the front sat Nathan Henderson, the family lawyer, a thin man with gray hair and spectacles perched on his sharp nose. His tone was professional but weary, as if he had delivered too many endings in one lifetime. Jack sat beside Marla, his hands folded, Diesel waiting obediently outside the door. Henderson cleared his throat and began. To my grandson, Troy Turner, I leave the Turner farmhouse, the adjoining acreage, and all assets pertaining to its maintenance. To my other relatives. He continued reading the list. Vehicles, savings accounts, antiques, even the collection of vintage helmets, all divided neatly among the family. Then came a pause. And to my grandson, Jack Turner, I bequeath my 1951 Harley-Davidson Panhead, currently stored at the old barn off Route 66, as well as the adjoining parcel of unused land. There was a rustle of whispers, a few raised eyebrows. Marla's hand tightened around Jack's. The lawyer looked up. That concludes the will. Jack didn't move. He sat there, silent, the way soldiers do when a blast has gone off too close, and they're waiting to make sense of the ringing in their ears. Around him, the family murmured their sympathies, and left in soft waves of perfume and polished shoes. When the room was empty, Henderson exhaled. I know this wasn't what you expected, Jack. Your grandfather made some unusual choices. Jack looked down at his calloused hands. He always did. His voice was even, but there was a rawness under it. Outside, the morning sun hit hard. Marla unlocked their truck, her voice breaking the silence. You look like someone just ran over your shadow. Jack gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. He left me a dead bike and a patch of dirt. Guess that's my legacy. Marla slid behind the wheel, the desert wind tossing her hair. Maybe it's not about what he left, but where it leads. She started the engine. We could go see it, the bike, the land. Jack hesitated. For years, he had avoided that part of Arizona. Too many ghosts on those roads. But as he looked at the sun-blanched horizon, something in his chest stirred. A faint pull, like a compass needle twitching back to true north. Yeah, he said finally. Let's see what's left. By late afternoon, they were on the highway. The world stretched out endless and open. The desert painted in colors of rust and bone. Jack's old pickup rattled along the faded stripes of Route 66. Its windows rolled down to the dry wind that smelled of dust and gasoline. Diesel sat upright in the back seat, ears pricked, tongue lolling in the heat. Every few miles, a mirage shimmered on the asphalt ahead, then melted away like a memory half-remembered. Marla fiddled with the radio until an old Johnny Cash song crackled through the static. She glanced sideways. You ever think about how your grandpa used to ride this road? Before the interstates, before all the noise? Jack smiled faintly. He said Route 66 was the only place a man could hear his own heartbeat. I used to think that was just biker poetry. Maybe it still is, she said, and the corners of her mouth softened into a smile. They stopped once for gas at a lonely station near Seligman. The air tasted of iron and rain that never came. A group of younger bikers in leather jackets rolled in, revving their engines. One of them, a tall man with tattoos curling up his neck, nodded toward Jack's truck. That your shepherd? Fine dog. Best soldier I ever served with, Jack replied. The biker grinned, offered a salute, and roared off into the desert with his pack, the echo of their engines fading like distant thunder. As twilight descended, the horizon burned orange. The road bent west, past tumbleweeds and rusted signs that once promised motel or cold beer, but now pointed at nothing but dust. Jack drove in silence, the rhythm of the road settling into his bones. Each mile carried him closer to the land his grandfather had left, but also deeper into the ache of memory. He remembered Earl's voice telling him that machines never really die. They just wait to be woken by the right hands. Maybe that was what this trip was. A waking. When they finally turned off the main highway, the sun had dipped below the cliffs. The dirt road ahead glowed faintly under the last wash of light. Diesel let out a low whine from the back seat. "Yeah, boy," Jack murmured. "We're almost there." The truck crested a small hill, and there it was, the Turner land. The barn leaned to one side, its wood silvered with age. Beyond it, the outline of the old farmhouse slumped against the horizon, half swallowed by mesquite and thyme. The Harley sat in the barn's open doorway, dust thick on the chrome but unmistakable in shape, like an old war horse waiting to ride again. Jack killed the engine. The world went quiet, except for the wind brushing through the dry grass. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and for a moment he just stood there, breathing in the scent of oil and sage. Marla came up beside him, slipping her arm through his. "Looks like it's been waiting for you." Jack didn't answer. He looked at the bike, at the sagging barn, at the land that shimmered with fading heat, and something unspoken passed through him. A strange mix of grief, gratitude, and unfinished business. The kind that doesn't fade, only deepens until you face it. He exhaled slowly. "Maybe it has," he said. "Maybe all of this has been waiting." Diesel barked once, sharp and low, as if agreeing. The desert wind carried the sound away, stretching it into the distance, until it became part of the highway's long, endless song. The morning light slanted through the cracks in the barn roof, slicing through years of dust that hung like quiet ghosts. The old Harley-Davidson panhead, its chrome dulled by time, stood in the corner like a monument to a man who refused to be forgotten. Jack Turner crouched beside it, his fingers tracing the curve of the fuel tank where faint initials, E.T., were engraved in a way only Earl Turner would have done. Small, discreet, yet stubbornly permanent. Jack's mind drifted as he worked. The smell of oil and dry hay carried him back to summers long past. The echo of his grandfather's voice teaching him to ride, the sound of wind rushing through the cornfields behind the farmhouse. Now the same wind whistled through broken boards, whispering like an old tune. The Harley was heavy with that same history. It wasn't just metal and bolts. It was legacy, a confession in steel. He turned the ignition key experimentally. The engine gave a low cough, then fell silent, as though waiting for permission to wake again. He smiled faintly. "You've still got a heartbeat, old girl," he murmured. Marla leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with a half smile. The sunlight framed her face, highlighting the streaks of gray near her temples. She had pulled her hair back into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder, and her shirt bore smudges of grease, an unintentional badge of loyalty. "You talk to that bike more gently than you talk to me," she teased. Jack chuckled, glancing up. "That's because she doesn't argue back." Their laughter echoed through the barn, easing the tension that had followed them since the reading of the will. Diesel padded over from the truck, his thick coat glinting gold under the light. The dog circled the Harley, sniffed, then settled at Jack's feet with a sigh, as though he too could sense something buried here, something that had been waiting too long to be found. As Jack wiped the seat clean, his hand brushed against a faint ridge beneath the leather. He frowned, feeling along the seam. The seat was thick, bolted tightly in place, but something inside felt hollow. "Marla, hand me the screwdriver," he said quietly. She fetched it from the toolbox without question, her curiosity piqued. Together they loosened the worn screws. The seat came free with a soft creak. Beneath it lay a narrow metal compartment, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. Inside, wrapped in brittle wax paper, was a letter sealed with an old drop of red wax and tied with twine. The handwriting on the envelope, slanted, determined, and slightly shaky, was unmistakable. Marla held her breath. "It's his, isn't it?" Jack nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, Earl Turner's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere." He hesitated before breaking the seal. The paper inside was yellowed but legible, the ink faded to sepia. He began to read aloud, voice low. "If you're reading this, Jack, then I reckon I'm long gone. Some things in a man's life can't be explained in a courtroom or on a piece of paper called a will. Some truths have to be found the old way, through grease, dust, and a little bit of courage. Route 66 will show you where to start. Trust the road, it never lies." Jack stopped there, the words blurring for a moment. His grandfather had never been one for letters. Every sentence carried weight, like something he'd struggled to write. He continued, slower this time. "You'll find a map inside. The mark of the wolf, our family's road sign, will lead you to what I couldn't say in life. Don't go alone, boy. Take the people who still believe in you. The road will test you, but the truth is worth the ride." When he finished, silence filled the barn, broken only by the rustle of paper in his hands. Marla exhaled. "He left you a scavenger hunt." Jack smiled faintly. "That's one way to put it. He always said the road was his church. Maybe this is his sermon." Diesel stood and barked once, tail swishing, as if agreeing that the search should begin immediately. They unfolded the second page, a map, drawn by hand, its edges frayed. A faint inked wolf's head marked a spot about 40 miles west, near a bend of Route 66, where the road curved toward the foothills. Next to it, a note read, "For the one who still rides with honor." Marla studied the map over Jack's shoulder. "That's near Dust Creek, isn't it? You told me he used to work there before the farm." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, old mechanic shop called the Iron Stallion. It shut down before I was born." "Then that's where we start." Jack replaced the seat, rebolting it carefully, as if sealing a secret back into place until it was ready to be revealed again. He glanced at the Harley, then at Marla. "Let's go see what he wanted me to find." They loaded the truck again, Diesel jumping into the back with a practiced leap. The road out of the Turner property was rough, the tires crunching over gravel and forgotten memories. As they merged onto Route 66, the wind picked up, flinging loose sand across the windshield. The sky stretched wide and merciless, painted in tones of amber and blue. For a long time, neither spoke. Marla watched the horizon while Jack drove, his hands steady on the wheel, the map folded neatly beside him. "You ever think," she said softly, "maybe he left you out of the will because this was the real inheritance? The kind that isn't measured in acres or dollars?" Jack kept his eyes on the road. "Maybe. Or maybe it's his way of apologizing for all the years we didn't talk." She reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "Either way, you're following his trail now. That means something." They reached Dust Creek by late afternoon. It was less a town than a ghost of one, just a scattering of wooden storefronts, a gas station that hadn't pumped in decades, and a diner with a faded neon sign still stubbornly glowing open, even though no one was inside. The air smelled faintly of rust and mesquite. The Iron Stallion garage stood at the end of the street. Its metal siding was pitted and sun-bleached, the sign hanging by one rusted chain. Jack pushed the door open. Inside, shafts of sunlight spilled through holes in the roof, illuminating rows of broken tools and an old workbench. That was when Diesel began to bark. Not a frantic bark, but a steady, purposeful one. The dog's paws scratched at the ground near the far wall. "What is it, boy?" Jack knelt beside him. The floorboards there were newer than the rest, the nails shiny compared to the rusted ones elsewhere. He pried one up with a crowbar from the workbench. The boards gave way to dry earth beneath. Together, he and Marla dug for a few minutes until the metal edge of something solid clinked against the crowbar. They brushed the dirt aside, revealing a small, rusted tin box. Jack lifted it carefully. It was heavier than it looked. The lid creaked as he opened it. Inside lay a brass key, tarnished but intact, its handle etched with the faint number 66 and a symbol of the wolf's head. Next to it was a faded photograph. Earl Turner, in his younger years, standing beside a beautiful dark-haired woman holding a small child. The woman's eyes were sharp, proud, and full of something fierce, while Earl's smile was softer than Jack had ever seen in real life. Marla leaned closer. "That's not your grandmother?" Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. "No, it's not." He turned the photo over. On the back, in his grandfather's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Earl, Rosa, and little Elena, 1956. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Jack stared at the handwriting, at the faces of strangers who were somehow family. The map, the letter, the key, all of it suddenly fit into a pattern too old to deny. His grandfather hadn't just left behind a road to follow. He'd left a secret buried in the dust of time. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the broken sign above the door. Diesel whined softly, resting his head on Jack's knee. Marla looked at him, eyes wide with both wonder and worry. "So, what now?" Jack closed the tin box gently, his expression unreadable. "Now," he said, "we find out why he hid this, and what he wanted me to do with it." The last light of day bled across the desert as they stepped outside, the photograph clutched in Jack's hand. Behind them, the Iron Stallion garage stood silent again, its secrets once more swallowed by the endless hum of Route 66. The sky over Dust Creek carried the color of tarnished brass when Jack and Marla returned to the abandoned garage marked on Earl's hand-drawn map. A dry wind blew across the road, gathering dust into spirals that shimmered under the sun. The structure stood crooked and silent at the far edge of the ghost town, its sign still clinging to the last flake of red paint. Route 66. Garage, beneath which the carved wolf's head, the Turner emblem, grinned faintly through rust. Jack parked the truck beside the old service bay. Diesel jumped down first, tail swishing, nose twitching. The dog's coat, streaked with silver along the neck, shone like a worn medal. He moved with the practiced caution of an old soldier, pausing before crossing thresholds, scanning the air as if memory itself were something that could ambush. Inside the garage, dust hung thick and still, and the faint smell of motor oil clung to the air. Light filtered through cracked roof panels, cutting sharp columns across the floor. Jack walked slowly, his boots stirring old bolts and cigarette butts. He touched the wall, where outlines of tools still lingered in darker shades of grime, like ghosts of hands long gone. Marla followed behind him, tying her braid tighter against the wind. Her freckles stood out beneath the thin film of desert dust, and the sharp line of her jaw set into quiet resolve. Though she tried to keep her voice steady, it trembled slightly when she spoke. "It feels like he just walked out one day and never came back." Jack nodded. That's exactly what he did. They passed an old lift, a row of rusted oil drums, and a cracked calendar still clinging to a wall. October 1974. The place had been sealed in that year's air. A lizard darted across the concrete and disappeared under a tire rim. At the far end of the garage, near a workbench littered with corroded tools, Diesel barked once, short and certain. Jack turned toward the sound. The dog had stopped in front of a large locker, heavy steel, its surface pitted and scarred. Jack's eyes narrowed. Faintly visible beneath a layer of grime was a familiar carving. the wolf's head. He knelt, brushing away the dust. There it is again. Same symbol as on the key. Marla crouched beside him. You think it's another hiding spot? Jack took the brass key from his pocket, the one marked with the wolf emblem and the number 66. The lock resisted for a second, then gave a tired click. The door swung open on stiff hinges, revealing a smaller iron safe inside. A box about the size of a toolbox, painted black but now streaked with red rust like dried blood. He exhaled slowly. Grandpa, what the hell were you hiding out here? The smaller key from the tin box fit perfectly into the safe. When he turned it, the mechanism clicked with precision, like a machine still loyal after decades of silence. Inside lay several items wrapped carefully in oiled cloth. Jack lifted them out one by one, laying them on the workbench where the sunlight could touch them. The first was a leather-bound journal, the kind mechanics use to record repair notes. The cover was cracked but intact, initials E.T. pressed into the corner. Next came an envelope, sealed with wax darkened to near black, and beneath it, a bundle of documents tied with faded string. Jack ran his thumb over the wax seal. You ready? He asked softly. Marla nodded, folding her arms but not hiding her curiosity. Open it. He left it for you. Jack broke the seal. The letter inside was short, written in Earl's unmistakable, angular hand. Jack, if you're reading this, you've already walked farther than most men ever do toward the truth. I wasn't a good man, not all the time. I loved someone once. Her name was Rosa Alvarez. She was the kind of woman who made a man believe the world could start over. I left her when I went to war. When I came back, they said she and our baby were dead. I buried the truth along with her name, or thought I did. But the dead don't stay quiet when the living lie to themselves. The words felt heavy in Jack's throat as he read. Marla stood beside him, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper like touching a wound. I learned too late that Rosa lived. She left Arizona with our daughter, Elena. I never saw either of them again. I built a new life with your grandmother, but I never stopped thinking about the ones I left behind. I couldn't make it right, but I could leave something for them, a way to know they were never forgotten. The proof of it is in the folder. 10 acres of land, a spring, a piece of the old Turner homestead. It belongs to her bloodline now, not mine. Forgive an old man his cowardice, and maybe help them find what I never could. Jack let the paper fall to the table. The silence that followed was dense, like the garage itself was holding its breath. Marla swallowed. He had another family. Jack's eyes were distant. Looks that way. Diesel rested his head on Jack's knee, sensing the change in the air. The dog's ears flicked, his eyes a mix of calm and worry. Jack absently scratched behind his ear. Guess the old man's legacy wasn't all engines and grease after all. He opened the leather journal next. The first pages held sketches of carburetors, wiring diagrams, quick notes about repair costs and weather patterns. But deeper inside, the tone shifted. The writing grew slower, almost confessional. Earl wrote of the accident. A truck overturned on a mountain road in New Mexico. The local paper had printed both Rosa and her child among the dead. I believed it, Earl had written. I wanted to believe it, because believing it meant I didn't have to face her. Jack exhaled through his teeth. He ran from it, and he never stopped running. Marla's voice softened. Maybe this is his way of finally turning back. They opened the final bundle, the TO, official documents tied in string. Inside were legal papers bearing the embossed seal of Coconino County, deeds, trust declarations, and notarized forms stacked neatly in protective sleeves. Jack unfolded the top one, scanning it under the light. The text was formal but clear. This document certifies that 10 acres of land, including natural spring and associated water rights, located on the eastern boundary of the Turner homestead, are hereby held in trust for the descendants of Rosa Alvarez and her lawful heirs. Jack froze. His fingers tightened on the page. Marla leaned over his shoulder. 10 acres. With a spring? He nodded, voice low. In Arizona, that's everything. They exchanged a long, quiet look. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, promising rain that might never reach the ground. Jack stacked the papers carefully and slipped them back into the folder. His movements were deliberate, reverent. He didn't leave me the land because it was never mine to have. He was trying to set something right. Marla brushed the dust from her hands. And now it's up to you to finish what he started. Diesel barked once, short, deep, like the closing of a door. Jack looked toward the open garage doors where the sun had begun to drop behind the horizon, turning the road into a river of gold. He felt the weight of generations pressing behind him, of choices made in youth that had stretched their shadows across time. We'll find them, he said finally. Whoever they are, whoever's left. Marla smiled faintly. Then let's start by finding out where this land really is. Jack tucked the documents under his arm, gave the garage one last glance, and stepped outside. The wind caught at his jacket, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. The wolf emblem above the door flickered in the dying light, as if nodding approval from another world. The storm gathered quietly on the horizon as they climbed back into the truck. Diesel curled up behind them, tail thumping once. Jack turned the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life, low and steady. They drove off into the dusk, the last light of day stretching long across the desert. Behind them, the Route 66 garage stood silent once more, keeping its rusted memories, and the ghost of Earl Turner's secrets, until the wind chose to tell them again. The morning sun over Flagstaff burned white and pitiless, flattening every shadow. Jack Turner sat across from the county clerk in a narrow office that smelled of paper, dust, and stale coffee. His hands rested on the folder recovered from the safe, documents that had already begun to change everything he thought he knew about his family. The clerk, a woman in her 60s named Martha Lang, wore large glasses that magnified eyes the color of faded denim. She was brisk but not unkind, her voice dry as the desert air. "Mr. Turner," she said, flipping through the pages, "these are legitimate. This trust is over 50 years old, signed, notarized, and never dissolved. 10 acres, recorded separately from the main Turner property. It's yours to administer on behalf of, let's see here, the descendants of Rosa Alvarez." She looked up. "Who are they?" Jack rubbed his temple. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Before she could respond, the glass door opened. Troy Turner stepped inside, carrying the kind of confidence that always came with money and freshly pressed suits. He was in his early 40s, with a square jaw dusted with designer stubble, and eyes as sharp as the Rolex glinting at his wrist. Once, as kids, Troy had followed Jack everywhere. Now everything about him screamed distance, cologne, cufflinks, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jack," he greeted, voice smooth as whiskey. "Didn't expect to find you buried in paperwork. You never were much of a desk guy." Jack stood slowly, tension tightening across his shoulders. "Didn't expect to see you here either. You buying or selling something that isn't yours." Troy's grin faltered, but only for a heartbeat. "It's called development. Horizon West wants to build a luxury resort along Route 66. Golf course, eco-lodges, the whole deal. You should be thanking me. This land will finally be worth something." "It's already worth something," Jack said evenly. "You just don't see it." The clerk sensed the shift in tone and busied herself with a filing cabinet. Troy's voice dropped, quieter now, harder. You always did like playing the noble soldier, but you're out of your depth here. Horizon's already invested millions. The contracts are nearly finalized. Don't embarrass yourself trying to stop it. Jack's eyes were calm, but his jaw set like stone. You don't own all of it. 10 acres are off limits, part of a separate trust. You know anything about that? For a flicker of a second, Troy's expression cracked. Then he chuckled, too quickly. 10 acres? You think that little patch of dirt means something? It means everything, Jack said, and it's not for sale. Troy's smirk returned, but there was a twitch of unease in it. He leaned closer. Be careful, cousin. You don't know who you're crossing. He left without waiting for an answer, his cologne lingering like smoke. Marla met Jack outside by the truck, shading her eyes against the glare. You look like you just swallowed gunpowder. He told her everything. About Troy, Horizon West, and the 10 acres that had suddenly become more valuable than gold. She listened silently, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. So he's selling off your family's legacy? Trying to, Jack said. But there's something bigger going on. He wouldn't push this hard unless Horizon wanted more than just land. Diesel barked once from the truck bed, tail thumping against the metal, a sound that broke the tension, if only slightly. That evening, they returned to the old Route 66 garage to secure the remaining papers. The desert was cooling fast, and the air carried the metallic tang of ozone before a storm. The last rays of sunset spilled through the broken windows, setting the dust alight like gold. Jack gathered the folder, the letter, and the journal, wrapping them carefully in plastic before storing them in the truck. Marla walked along the edge of the property, flashlight in hand. Feels different tonight, she said. Too quiet. Diesel prowled near the barn, nose low, tail stiff. His ears flicked once, twice. Then he froze. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Jack looked up sharply. What is it, boy? Before he could move, Diesel lunged towards the side of the barn, barking furiously. Jack followed, his flashlight cutting through the dark, and caught the faint shimmer of liquid pooling on the ground. Gasoline. The sharp, unmistakable stench hit his nose a second later. Marla, he shouted, get back. The first spark came from somewhere near the rear wall, a glint of light, then a whoosh as fire roared to life, crawling up the wooden beams. The air exploded with heat. Jack grabbed Marla's arm, pulling her backward as Diesel barked against the wind, refusing to retreat until the flames surged high enough to swallow the doorway. The sound was deafening, metal groaning, glass shattering, fire devouring the dry timbers like hungry breath. They stumbled outside, choking on smoke. Marla coughed, eyes streaming. Someone set this! I know, Jack said, voice raw. He shielded her as part of the roof collapsed inward with a sound like thunder. The night turned orange, the flames visible for miles. Diesel stood beside them, panting heavily, eyes reflecting the firelight like twin embers. By the time the fire department arrived, the garage was gone. Charred metal and blackened earth were all that remained. A young fire investigator named Deputy Cal Danner, a tall, lean man with a face still carrying traces of boyhood but eyes already shadowed by too many crime scenes, walked the perimeter with a flashlight. His uniform smelled of smoke, and his tone was businesslike but sympathetic. Looks like an accelerant, Danner said, crouching near the scorched ground. Gasoline, probably, spread deliberately along the west wall. He straightened, brushing soot from his gloves. You folks have any enemies? Jack gave a bitter smile. At least one. Marla wrapped her arms around herself. You think this has to do with that Horizon company? Danner tilted his head. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried to clear disputed property before a deal went through. I'll file a report. You'll want to keep those documents somewhere safe." Jack nodded. "They already are." As the firefighters doused the last embers, the desert fell quiet again. The wind carried the acrid scent of burnt wood and gasoline far into the night. Jack stood before the ruins, his face carved in shadow. "He left me a secret, and now someone wants to burn it down." Marla stepped beside him, resting her hand on his back. "Then we fight fire with truth." Diesel pressed his head against Jack's leg, tail flicking once as if in agreement. Behind them, the smoke curled upward into the night sky, drifting across the desert like a dark prayer. Jack looked toward the horizon, toward the stretch of land where the old homestead would be, where the trust had marked its boundaries. The flames had not touched that ground yet, but the war for it had already begun. He exhaled slowly. "They want to erase what he left behind," he said. "We're not going to let them." Marla's hand tightened around his. "Then we start tomorrow." The fire hissed behind them, dying to embers. The stars blinked awake, one by one, cold and distant above the rising smoke. The rain came to Albuquerque like a soft confession, washing the desert dust from the streets and filling the gutters with silver reflections. Jack drove the old pickup slowly through the quiet neighborhoods, headlights cutting through the drizzle. Marla sat beside him, the map folded on her lap, her hand resting lightly on Diesel's head in the back seat. The dog watched the road with sharp, steady eyes, his ears flicking at every sound of thunder that rolled across the darkening sky. They had driven nearly 7 hours from Flagstaff, the memory of the fire still clinging to their clothes like smoke. Jack's thoughts were heavy, circling the same sentence from the letter he had found. "Find them. Help them know they were never forgotten." That single line had led him here, to a small house on the edge of the city where the desert met the lights. The address written in Earl's leather journal was simple: 3423 Juniper Road. The house looked modest and well-kept, painted pale blue with wind chimes made of old keys hanging by the porch. The sound of them was delicate and haunting, a whisper of years long gone. Marla reached over, touching Jack's arm gently. "You ready?" He nodded, though his stomach felt tight. "As I'll ever be." He stepped out into the rain, Diesel following close behind, his fur darkening as droplets clung to him. They climbed the porch steps. Jack hesitated for a long moment before knocking. The door opened after a few seconds, revealing a woman in her early 60s. Elena Alvarez had a quiet strength about her, the kind that comes from surviving life's long storms. Her hair, streaked with silver, fell loosely around her shoulders. Her skin was olive-toned, lined gently around the eyes, and her gaze carried both caution and recognition, as though she had been waiting for this moment all her life. She wore a denim jacket over a simple white shirt, and her hands were stained faintly with oil paint. "Yes?" Her voice trembled slightly. Jack swallowed. "My name's Jack Turner. I think you knew my grandfather." "Earl Turner." For a heartbeat, silence filled the space between them. Then her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Earl," she whispered, almost to herself. "I thought I'd never hear that name again." Jack nodded, unsure what to say next. He left something for you, and I think he wanted us to meet." Elena stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. The house smelled of rain and sage, with paintings lining the walls, landscapes of the desert, portraits of bikers on long highways, and one small framed photograph near the mantelpiece. It was old, black and white, a young woman with dark eyes, Rosa Alvarez, holding a child beside a man Jack recognized instantly as Earl, years before the gray hair and lined face. Elena noticed his gaze and smiled faintly. "That's my mother," she said softly. "And that man, I used to wonder if he was real or just something my heart invented." They sat together at the small kitchen table. Marla poured tea from the pot Elena offered, the steam curling like ghosts between them. Diesel lay by the back door, watchful and calm. Jack took out the folder from his jacket, the trust papers, the letter, the deed. "He never stopped thinking about you," he said. "He thought you and Rosa died. When he found out the truth, it was too late. But he wanted to leave something behind, something for your family." Elena reached for the papers with shaking hands, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. "I used to get envelopes in the mail when I was a child," she said, voice trembling. "Always postmarked from different towns along Route 66. No return address, just money, enough for school clothes, medicine when Mama was sick, sometimes even birthday cards. She told me it was from a friend. I never believed her. I always knew it was from him." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "And now you're here, after all these years." Jack didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. Elena stood and disappeared into the next room. When she returned, she carried a wooden box with brass hinges, worn but polished with care. She set it on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were letters, old photographs, and a bundle of legal papers bound with faded twine. "These," she said softly, "are the originals. My mother kept everything, the proof that the trust was real, and that Earl Turner never forgot her, even when the world made him pretend." Jack looked at the documents inside. The signatures matched perfectly with those from the safe. His chest tightened with something between relief and sorrow. Elena's expression softened as she studied him. "You have his eyes," she said quietly. "Same blue, same sadness." Jack gave a small smile. "I didn't know him well, but I think I'm starting to understand the man he was, and the one he wanted to be." For a long while, none of them spoke. The rain beat gently against the window, a rhythmic sound like heartbeats. Marla rose to refill their cups, her voice warm. "He left the land in your name," she said to Elena. 10 acres, including the spring. He called it a trust, but really it's a promise. Maybe it's time both sides of the family stop living like ghosts." Elena reached across the table and took Jack's hand in hers. Her touch was steady now. "You don't owe me anything, Jack. But if you truly want to honor your grandfather's memory, protect that land. Don't let them take it. Not for money, not for concrete." Jack nodded. "That's exactly what I intend to do." She smiled, eyes glistening with the kind of peace that only comes after decades of unanswered questions. "Then maybe this is what he wanted all along, for us to find each other before it was too late." Diesel Boyd lifted his head, tail brushing the floor once, as if to acknowledge the words. As evening fell, the rain eased into a light mist. Jack and Marla stood on the porch, preparing to leave. Elena came to the doorway, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. She hugged Marla first, then turned to Jack. Her voice was low but firm when she spoke. "I don't have much family left," she said, "but you're part of it now. My mother believed Earl would come back one day. Maybe he finally did. Through you." Jack's throat tightened. "I'll take care of the land," he promised. "It's what he'd want." Elena smiled through her tears. "No, son. It's what we want. For him, for Rosa, for all of us." They embraced, the rain falling softly around them. The desert breathing under the weight of generations healed at last. As Jack walked back to the truck, Diesel trotted beside him, pausing once to look back at the house. Inside, Elena stood at the window, one hand on the glass, the faintest smile on her lips. 3 lives, 3 generations, tied together by love, loss, and the winding road of Route 66. When Jack started the engine, the sound was low and steady, like a heartbeat, the same rhythm that once guided his grandfather's rides across the endless American highways. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a return. The courthouse in Coconino County was an old sandstone building with pillars the color of the desert, its steps worn smooth by decades of arguments and confessions. The morning sun glared against its windows, turning the flag above it into a brilliant blaze of red and white. Jack Turner stood at the bottom of those steps, his reflection ghosted in the glass doors, the weight of generations heavy on his shoulders. Marla adjusted his collar, smoothing the crease with her thumb. Her brown hair caught the light, and her eyes, calm but watchful, seemed to read every unspoken thought on his face. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "As ready as a man can be," Jack said, taking a deep breath. Diesel stood beside him, tail low, fur brushed to a sheen. The shepherd had aged over the years, graying around the muzzle, but his posture remained proud, his gaze alert. The courthouse guard smiled faintly at the sight of the dog. "Service animal?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, you could say that." Inside, the courtroom was small but crowded. The air carried that mix of paper, perfume, and quiet tension unique to legal battles, where families clash. On the left sat Troy Turner, his once confident posture subdued. He wore a dark suit that fit him too tightly, as if success no longer recognized him. The tan of his skin had faded into a paler hue, and a line of exhaustion cut through his face. Beside him sat a woman in a charcoal blazer, Rebecca Sloan, Horizon West's legal representative. She was in her 40s, tall, sharp-featured, and carried herself like someone who'd been raised to win. Her eyes, pale green and analytical, studied every movement with surgical precision. At the front table, Jack's lawyer, Henry Caldwell, stacked folders in neat order. Caldwell was a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, his thinning silver hair tied neatly behind his head. A former military prosecutor turned land rights attorney, he had a way of speaking that made truth sound like a verdict. Years ago, a wrongful conviction during his service had broken something in him, leaving behind a man obsessed with fairness, a man who fought every case as though it were penance. "Morning, Jack," Caldwell said, voice steady. "We've got everything we need. Deeds, notarizations, trust documents, even the original Route 66 ledger. You just sit still and let the facts speak." Jack nodded. "I trust you." The judge entered, Judge Miriam Reyes, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pinned into a perfect knot and the kind of gaze that silenced rooms. She had once been a public defender for minors and veterans, known for her temper and her relentless empathy. When she looked at Jack, something in her expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Let's begin," she said. Caldwell started with the trust papers. He laid them out like a trail map, each document leading to another. The deed from 1960, the notarized amendment signed by Earl Turner, and the financial ledgers from the Route 66 Trust, all verifying the 10 acres and water rights set aside for Rosa Alvarez's descendants. "Your Honor," Caldwell said, voice firm, "the defendant and Horizon West attempted to incorporate this land into a corporate development through forged conveyance documents, falsified signatures, backdated filings, and the use of deceased notaries. This is not a property dispute. It's a matter of fraud." Across the aisle, Rebecca Sloan stood gracefully, her tone cool and composed. "Objection, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Turner, acted under the impression that the land was part of the estate. Horizon West acted in good faith based on records provided by him." Judge Reyes's brow furrowed. Records that have now been proven false. Rebecca paused, the faintest twitch of discomfort crossing her face. We were misinformed, not malicious. Jack watched silently, hands clasped. Troy avoided his gaze, staring instead at the tabletop. The man who once stood taller than life now looked like a shadow, thinner, diminished. When Caldwell handed the original folder across the bench, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Inside were Earl Turner's handwritten letters and the official Route 66 trust stamp, impossible to fake, authenticated by the county registrar. Caldwell continued. Earl Turner never abandoned his family. He left this trust as an act of restitution. And this man, he pointed to Jack, chose to uphold that promise rather than sell it for profit. That, Your Honor, is the difference between inheritance and integrity. For a long moment, the judge said nothing. Then she turned to Troy. Mr. Turner, do you wish to respond? Troy hesitated, eyes flicking toward the Horizon attorney, who gave a subtle nod. But something inside him cracked. His hands, clasped together, began to tremble. When he finally spoke, his voice came low and broken. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said. Horizon made it sound simple, just paperwork, some signatures. They said the trust was obsolete, that no one would care. I was drowning in debt. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. He swallowed hard. But Jack did. He always does. Caldwell remained still. The courtroom listened. I lied to my own blood, Troy continued. I thought I was smarter, faster, but all I did was lose everything that mattered. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air like the first drops of rain before a storm. Jack exhaled slowly, the anger that had lived in him for months draining away, replaced by something heavier. Pity. When the judge finally spoke, her tone carried both gravity and grace. The court recognizes the Route 66 trust as legally binding. The 10 acres in question belong to the Alvarez-Turner lineage and will remain protected under the terms set by Earl Turner. Horizon West's claim is nullified. She paused, glancing at Troy. Mr. Turner, you're fortunate your cousin values mercy over revenge. I suggest you learn from him. A hush filled the room. Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting gold through the courtroom's dusty windows. After adjournment, reporters gathered near the steps, cameras flashing. Mr. Turner, one shouted, what will you do with the land now? Jack stopped, Diesel at his side. What my grandfather intended, he said simply. To keep it alive. Marla joined him, slipping her hand into his. Her touch steadied him in a way words never could. You did it, she whispered. He looked at her, eyes soft. No, he said quietly. We did, and so did he. They watched as Troy exited the courthouse. The man paused at the top of the steps, shoulders slumped. When his eyes met Jack's, he gave a small, trembling nod, an apology that needed no words. Jack returned the nod, just once. Later that evening, the news called it the Route 66 inheritance case. Headlines painted Jack Turner as the unlikely hero, the veteran biker who protected his family's legacy against corporate greed. Photos showed him standing beside the courthouse, Marla and Diesel in the frame, sunlight spilling behind them. He didn't care much for fame, but as he looked at the image, something in him shifted. For the first time, he felt like Earl Turner's story, and Rosa's and Elaine the desert always remembered. Even after fire had swallowed the old Turner garage, the earth still held the scent of oil and dreams in its soil. 1 year later, that same patch of land no longer smelled of smoke, but of fresh paint, roasted coffee, and renewal. The sign out front was made of reclaimed pine, hand-carved with care. Earl Turner Heritage Stop, for those who keep riding. The building stood low and proud against the horizon, part garage, part roadside cafe, its walls decorated with Route 66 memorabilia and old biker photographs. A mural stretched across one side, depicting a lone rider under a sunset sky, painted by Elena Alvarez herself. Her brushwork captured both motion and silence, the eternal hum of wheels and wind. Inside, the sound of wrenches clinking mingled with the hiss of espresso. Jack Turner stood behind the counter, wiping grease from his hands, the years having deepened his features without hardening them. He wore a denim shirt rolled at the sleeves, his hair touched with gray at the temples, and a small scar still visible near his jaw, a reminder of his service days. Despite his quiet nature, there was a steadiness about him, a man at peace with the noise of engines and the silence of memory. Marla moved through the cafe like sunlight, efficient and warm. Her once braided hair now fell loose, streaked faintly with gold from the Arizona sun. She had taken over the cafe side of the business, filling it with the smell of strong coffee, homemade pie, and laughter. A radio near the window played softly, old country songs mixing with the hum of customers' voices, bikers, travelers, veterans, all drawn to this new sanctuary on the old road. Diesel, now 10 years old, lay near the doorway with a red bandana around his neck. His muzzle was white, but his spirit was untouched. He had become a local legend, the guardian dog of Route 66. Visitors took pictures with him, sometimes slipping him treats. Diesel tolerated the attention with dignified calm, eyes half closed, tail thumping lazily on the wooden floor. One late afternoon, as sunlight bled across the desert sky, a familiar truck pulled up, weathered blue, with a careful hand-painted logo on the door. Rosa Alvarez Fund. Elena Alvarez stepped out, wearing jeans, a linen shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her silver hair. Despite her age, she moved with energy and purpose. The years of painting and travel had etched fine lines around her eyes, but they only made her look more alive. She greeted Marla with a warm hug, then turned to Jack. "You rebuilt it exactly as I imagined," she said, gazing around the garage. "Except maybe a little cleaner." Jack smiled. "Don't look too close. The paint's still drying." Elena laughed, a deep, melodic sound that filled the space. "Mama would have loved this," she said, glancing at the mural outside. "She always believed the road could bring people together. Now it finally has." They sat together in the cafe's corner booth. Marla poured them coffee while Diesel came to rest his head near Elena's feet, tail wagging softly. "He remembers you," Marla said. Elena reached down, scratching behind his ears. "I remember him too," she replied, smiling. "He was there when everything burned, wasn't he?" Jack nodded. "He saved our lives that night." Through the window, the desert glowed gold and crimson. Elena's voice turned thoughtful. "The foundation's growing faster than I ever expected. Veterans' families, single parents, lost kids, all finding help through Rosa's name. It feels like she's still out there, somewhere on the wind." Jack listened in silence, pride and gratitude mixing in his chest. "Earl would have been proud," he said softly. "He tried to make amends in his own way, but you're the one finishing it." Elena shook her head. "No, Jack. We are." The sound of a motorcycle engine broke the quiet, low, rumbling, familiar. They all turned as the bike rolled into the lot. The rider dismounted slowly, removing his helmet. It was Troy Turner, his hair longer, streaked with gray, his face leaner but gentler. His hands were scarred, fingernails dark with grease, the hands of a man who worked for a living again. He walked toward them with hesitation, but no arrogance, dressed in simple jeans and a flannel shirt. "I heard you were hiring," he said quietly. Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the garage. Depends what you can fix. Troy smiled faintly. Anything with an engine and a soul. Marla stepped forward, her tone soft. Then you start Monday. The tension broke, replaced by something fragile but real, the kind of peace earned, not given. Troy exhaled, shoulders dropping. I just want to work, not for money, for what I owe. Elena's eyes softened. Then work with us, she said. Help the next generation find their road. By twilight, the cafe buzzed with travelers. The neon sign flickered to life outside, bathing the gravel lot in amber light. The air smelled of coffee, oil, and dust, the scent of the open road. A young couple stopped to take pictures by the mural. An old veteran with a prosthetic leg sat at the counter, laughing with Marla as Jack topped off his coffee. Diesel dozed near the jukebox, one paw twitching in a dream. Troy worked in the corner, repairing an old Harley someone had left for restoration. His hands moved carefully, reverently, each bolt turned as though it carried memory. When he finished, he stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Jack joined him. She'll ride again, Troy said. Jack nodded. So will we all. The two men shared a quiet moment of understanding. No words, no forgiveness spoken, but something deeper exchanged. As the last customer left, the desert fell silent except for the whispering wind. Marla locked the door, flipping the sign to closed, and joined Jack outside. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a sky streaked with fire and indigo. Diesel sat between them, tail sweeping the sand. Jack climbed onto his grandfather's restored 1951 Harley Panhead, the same one that had once carried Earl across the desert. The engine roared to life, deep, steady, alive. Marla climbed on behind him, resting her head against his shoulder. Diesel settled at their feet, watching the horizon where the stars began to blink awake. For a while, none of them spoke. The hum of the bike, the wind against their faces, and the fading light said all there was to say. Marla's voice finally broke the stillness, soft as the desert breeze. He didn't leave you money, she said, her lips near his ear. He left you the road that would bring you home. Jack smiled, starting the engine again. The Harley rumbled beneath them, its rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Diesel barked once, as if to bless the journey. The road stretched ahead, bathed in the last light of dusk. As they rode toward the horizon, the wind carried with it the scent of freedom and the echo of Earl Turner's legacy, whispering through the desert. Keep riding. In the end, Jack's journey wasn't just about roads or inheritances. It was about redemption, grace, and the quiet miracles that God weaves into our lives when we least expect them. Sometimes the greatest blessings don't come wrapped in wealth or comfort, but in forgiveness, love, and the courage to keep going even when the path seems lost. Like the Turners, we all carry scars and second chances. Perhaps that's how God reminds us we're still part of His plan. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below about what home means to you, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of faith, healing, and the unseen hand that guides us all. May God bless and protect everyone watching, and may the road ahead always lead you toward grace,